All right, welcome back, guys, to another really exciting Algebra 1 lesson. This time we're going to be talking about factoring by grouping, if you couldn't tell that by the title page here. Hopefully you've been keeping up with whatever you've been required to do so far, whether it's your first lesson or your fifth. Hopefully you've been keeping track of everything and ready for me when I come back. Factoring is going to be a really important thing, guys. This is something that you're going to have multiple questions on your Keystone exam about. We're going to talk about a lot of different ways to factor. And the big way we're going to talk about factoring is by grouping. Grouping tends to be one of the easier ways to do it. But in order to really understand it, we kind of are going to break it down. So this lesson is going to talk about grouping in terms of using basically GCFs to factor. And then the next couple lessons we'll talk more about when we have a trinomial and we try to use grouping. I know that all sounds like gibberish to you right now, but this will make sense later. All right, so basically what we're doing is we are doing the reverse distributive property. We very briefly talked about this earlier in the year when we first started talking about distributing things. But we're basically going to be doing the same thing. And with grouping, what we're going to do is we're going to basically take these 4-term polynomials, and we're going to look at the first 2 terms. So in this equation, that would be these 2. And then we'll look at the last 2 terms. In this equation, that would be these 3. And basically what we're looking for is there a GCF that will come out of both of these? So my goal is to find a GCF that will come out of both of these and kind of take it out. Now, we talked about GCFs earlier, so this should kind of be familiar. In this first 2, a GCF that's in both of these would be X. X is something that would come out. And what would I be left over with? That's what I write inside parentheses. X minus 7. Over here, I do the same thing. I say, all right, is there an X, or is there a GCF that can come out of these? And in this case, it's going to be 3. And what's left over? X minus 7. Okay, and that is using your GCF to factor by grouping. Now, you might see a further way we can go, but we'll come back to that later. For right now, I'm just concerned about looking at the first 2 terms and the third and fourth term, and coming up with a GCF that will come out of them. This is factoring, doing that reverse distributive property. You can always check your work if you want to make sure if you're correct or not by distributing back through again. If you distribute back through, you should end up with what you started with. X times x, that gives me x squared. X times negative 7, that gives me minus 7x. Hey, look, that's what I started with up here. 3x minus 21. Hey, look, that's what I started with up here. So we can always check our work by distributing back through, and it's probably a good idea to do to make sure we know what's going on. Look at this next one. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to look at the first 2 terms, and I'm going to look at the second 2 terms, and try to see if there is a GCF that will come out of each of them. Now, if I look at the first 2, I can see that an A is going to come out. In the numbers 12 and 21, the GCF for those is going to be 3. So I'm going to have 3 and A. Now, unfortunately, the other variable parts, the C and the D, they don't have anything in common, so I'm just going to have to leave those. So inside the parentheses, I'll be left over with 4C, and I will be left over with 7D. If we go ahead and take a look at these third and fourth terms over here, I can see that we have an 8 and a 14. The GCF that's shared between those is 2. I have a B in each term, so I can pull a B out as well. And there's nothing I can take out from C and D, so those are going to have to stay. I'm going to be left with 4C plus 7D. And because this was a positive 2 I took out, I put a plus sign in the middle. Now, again, you might notice something. This is what we're going to do later in this lesson. If you look at these 2, notice that they're the same. But this was factoring by grouping, being able to take out that GCF from each of these in order to do this factoring by grouping. Okay? So reverse distributive property, again, I can check my answer if I wanted to by distributing back through again and seeing if I end up with what I started with. For this case, I will tell you will end up with that. This third one I want you to try on your own. So look at the first 2 terms and the third and fourth term and see if you can go ahead and factor those using grouping for me. Take out a GCF from each. Pause the video, and then in a moment or 2, once you think you have it figured out, unpause the video and check your work. All right, so this is what I ended up with. Hopefully that negative in the third and fourth term didn't get you too bad. When you're looking at the GCF to take out, hopefully you notice that negative 7 is actually the largest thing that goes into negative 21 and negative 14. So negative 7 would be what I would take out. If you both share a negative, you need to make sure you take that negative out, and that's why that minus sign's here instead of a plus sign. But for the first two terms, I took an x out. That was all that was shared. That was your GCF. I have 3x plus 2 left over. Over here, I took out a negative 7. I have 3x plus 2 left over. Now, if you've been paying attention, you should have noticed, and I kind of pointed this out a couple times, these things that are left over here always have matched up so far. That is because I have these set up to do that for you, because it's going to lead us into our next part of factoring by grouping. Later this week, we will talk about how to actually get it set up like this so this will always happen. But for right now, I just want to show you what will happen or how to do it when it already is set up this way. So that's where we're going to get into factoring a 4-term polynomial. First, you're going to do that GCF thing that we just did, that exact same thing. Take that GCF and use it to factor. Okay? You're then going to look to see if you have the same factor, which with the way these are set up, that will happen. And then you're going to use them and factor them out. What does that mean? Well, let's look at this one right here. We're going to start with that first part that we did in the last one. Okay, same thing we did last time. I'm going to take these two, and I'm going to go ahead and try to factor out something. So from these two, I will take out a 4c. That's what's going to be shared with them. And I'm going to be left over with 2c minus d. Okay, so if you look, I take out a 4c, all I'm left here is 2c. All I'm left with here is a d, minus d. Over here, I'm going to be taking out a 6c. And a d. Actually, no, I'm mistaken. It's just a d. Okay, can't take a c out here. So, what's going to be left over, because there's no c here. See, even I make mistakes sometimes. What's going to be left over here, if I take 6 out of 12, is going to be a 2. And then that c is still going to be hanging out there. And in the second term, I've taken out this 6, so I'm going to have a minus, because I didn't take out negative 6, just positive 6. And then if I look d squared and take out a d, I'm going to be left over with d. Now, once again, you should notice, these match each other. That is something special that we want to have happen. What that means is that we can now factor further. And it's going to kind of look a little bit like a magic trick. Okay, but what we're really doing is, again, we're using reverse distributive property here. Okay, what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to take these two factors, and I'm basically going to consolidate them and just write them down here once. I'm going to write parenthesis 2c minus d. And then I'm going to take whatever else I have. So in this case, if I look here, I have this 6d and I have this 4c, and they are being added together. I'm going to write that next to it. 4c plus 6d. And that is going to be my answer fully factored. Now you might say, Mr. Guy, where the heck did this come from? Basically what we're doing is we actually are doing FOIL here. This is the first term being multiplied by the outer and the inner. This is the last term being multiplied by the outer and the inner. Or you can do it vice versa. Actually, the way we wrote it is vice versa. First times outer, first times inner, last times outer, last times inner. We are basically taking this and just rewriting it using FOIL. If you multiply this out down here, you will end up with the exact same thing we started with. You will go back and you'll end up right here. However, this form is going to be a lot more helpful for us when we get to some further equation solving. It's going to be really important we can factor it and turn it into this form. Write it as a product of factors. So this is it fully factored, where I have parenthesis, two things being multiplied, parenthesis, two things being added or subtracted, close parenthesis, parenthesis, two things being added or subtracted, close parenthesis, and these things are being multiplied. Okay? That's called factoring. Now, I know it looks like a magic trick. You might be like, Mr. Guy, what's going on? I know this one says you try. We're going to do this one together. And then you guys can try the next one on your own. Same thing with this one. I'm going to take these two parts right here. These two parts right here. Try to figure out what's a GCF that comes out. In this first pair, it's only A. A is the only thing that will come out. Left with A plus 5. With the second one, the only thing that will come out is actually a 4. When I take out a 4, I'll be left with A plus 5. Hey, look at that. I have an a plus 5 here and here. Now, this next thing only works if these match, and luckily for us, they do. So I'm going to rewrite a plus 5. And then the other parentheses are going to take whatever else I have. So that'd be this and these. And that's what I'm going to write there. A plus 4. And there we go. We just factored. Pretty cool, right? I know you probably don't think so, but I think it's pretty cool. Okay, you try this one. Go ahead and try factoring this one. Again, start by looking at just these two terms. What will come out? Then look at these two terms. What will come out? And then once you have that, you take whatever's in parentheses, rewrite it down here, and then take the things that are left over and rewrite it over here. I made a straight mark. Go ahead and do that. Pause the video. Do that for me. Then come back and check your work. All right, if you're finished, you should have ended up with something like this. Again, you take 2y out of these, you end up with 3y minus 2. If you take over here, negative 16 is the only thing come out, you end up with 3y minus 2. These match, so I can go ahead and rewrite that down here, and then take whatever's left over. That would be this, and that's what goes in the other parentheses. Now, you actually are not finished factoring this one. I know it looks like we are, but there actually is more GCFs we can take out. Within your parentheses, if there is something that is shared that you can take out further, you are allowed to keep taking it out. In this example, I can look right here and see that I actually have a 2 that can come out of each of these. In order to remedy that and have it be fully factored, I'll write that on the outside. That 2 I want to take out. The 3y minus 2 will not change. I am not taking anything out of that. What I am taking out of, though, this parentheses. So I'm going to rewrite this as y minus 8. And again, if you were to go ahead and FOIL this back through, multiply by 2, or FOIL these or whatever, you will end up back with this again. Okay, that's a way to check your work and see if you did this correctly. We're just rewriting these polynomials in a new form. This is going to help us with something we do later. This is called factoring. And again, this is going to be a very, very, very important skill to know. Okay, some other examples. Sometimes there's not like further things we can do. Once we go ahead and we take out a GCF, we are where we are. So like for this one, if I go ahead and take out a 6, I'm going to end up with 2a plus 9. There's really nothing else I can do. This is still factored, though. I still went ahead and factored out a GCF. There's nothing else I can do. I am doing what I do. Over here, I can look at this and say, oh, GCF I can take out is d. So I'll take out a d, and I end up with d squared minus 1. Now, hopefully, your alarm bells are ringing off in your head, because if I look at this d squared minus 1, that should be a special pattern that I know. In fact, it's Mr. Guy's favorite special pattern called difference of squares. That means I can basically jump right ahead to what it looks like factored, which is d plus 1 and d minus 1, the difference of squares. Okay, d plus 1 and d minus 1. All right, so that's another special one you want to be on the lookout for, is that if you see one of the special patterns, in this case, it's kind of reversed, but you see one of the special patterns, you can factor from there. And that's really what we have for this lesson here, guys. Hopefully, you guys should have the worksheet that goes along with this. That one also, what's kind of nice about it, gives a little description of how to do factoring again. So if you kind of forget, you look at your notes, and you want another resource to look at, it does provide another resource. Hopefully, you're keeping up with everything. You know what's going on. If you have any questions, remember, feel free to go ask any of the other math teachers for help. Feel free to ask other people in class. Whatever you need to do to understand what's going on. This is all about you guys, because you're the one ultimately taking the keystone here at the end. All right? Good luck.